Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. Okay, so this one is kind of a, bit of a confusing one, but also a bit of a fun one. But, yeah, this episode essentially is, Fred gets replaced by an evil version of himself. And it's an interesting concept, but, yeah, in any case, I'll get to that. But, in case the episode opens up with the gang being asked by Mayor Nettles to investigate an old abandoned house. Because, of course, and what she apologizes for having them come to investigate on such short notice. But she proceeds to go on to explain how there's been a lot of weird noises and blood-curdling screams and a whole bunch of other things coming from the house, and she wants them to investigate. Which Shaggy just concludes same old, same old. But in cases at this point where they get ready to just break up and start solving mysteries, and of course Fred laments the fact that they're not going to be able to that they need to relocate the Planispheric Disk, and points out that they're not going to have time to do that now. At which point Shaggy points out that he and Scooby would be more than happy to do it. But Daphne then dissuades them from doing that, pointing out that actually only Fred can actually move the Planispheric Disk because he's the only one who knows where it is. He's the one who physically picked it up, moved it, and hid it somewhere else, so that the old Mystery Inc. couldn't find it. And for that reason, Fred's the one who's going to have to move the disc when and if they finish up with the mystery they're currently trying to solve. But in cases at this point where without further ado, Fred takes a bit of a triumphant pose and claims that they've got another mystery on their hands, which Daphne finishes for him and points out that they're so in love that they're finishing each other's sentences. But then we find out Fred is just that predictable. Case in point, he then proceeds it's time to start splitting up and looking for clues, which everybody predicts because obviously that's what they do every single time they go to solve a mystery. Fred says, we got another mystery on our hands, then they split up to go look for clues. But in any case, it's at this point where the gang actually goes to, split up and look for clues. The rest of the, Shaggy and Scooby, I believe, go upstairs while the girls investigate the floor. I don't really remember which is which, but in any case, the rest of the gang goes to explore the rest of the house while Fred goes alone to the basement. And Fred goes downstairs, and he's got a flashlight, and he winds up spooking himself in the mirror when he gets a good look at it. And he believes it's some sort of horrible, grotesque monster that he's looking at, and but although he doesn't realize that he's actually looking at his own reflection, and comically insults himself before realizing he's just looking in a mirror, which is really funny. But in case he gets close to the mirror, looks at it, pointing out that it seems normal. And then proceeds to adjust his ascot in the mirror and then proceed to walk off. But notably, the reflection takes a few seconds to follow exactly behind him, which of course strikes Fred as a little bit odd. And he immediately tries to fake out his own reflection to try and trick it. But quickly discovers that the reflection isn't trying to do any of that, and concludes that it's probably just his imagination. But then he walks away, and then it's revealed that his reflection gives him an evil smile, and is revealed to be sentient, and then it proceeds to grab him and pull him through the mirror. And that's what the titular name of the episode is, The Man in the Mirror. But in case it's then revealed that 20 minutes have gone by since Fred got pulled through the mirror. And he starts to investigate, and of course, at this point where Velma has since updated Mayor Nettles with what exactly is going up, with what exactly they found in the house, revealing that in actuality it was just a cat with irritable bowel syndrome. It got locked in a room somewhere, and that was the blood curdling noises that everybody kept hearing. So yeah, it was just a cat. That's all they went to investigate, and of course, is this one where she hangs up, and then remarks that they need to she's a little worried about Fred, pointing out that it's been 20 minutes and he still hasn't shown up yet, and she remarks that they may in fact be late for, they may be in fact be late for school, but which this isn't true, considering several of the other episodes now they've been late for school, but But in case Shaggy reassures her that he was probably fine, and that since there was nothing really terrifying in the house other than the really loud, really noisy cat, and also Scooby's just really bad impression of Shaggy's mother. So which of course he then proceeds Scooby then proceeds to give us a demonstration of, revealing that he found a hat that kind of reminds him of Shaggy's mother, and then proceeded to give his best impression of her, which he remarks is the trick is that's all in the hat. At which point Fred walks out, but notably he sounds a little bit off, and also he's acting a little bit strangely. Case in point, when Daphne runs up to hug him because she was worried, he immediately just rebuffs her, walks past her to get in the mystery machine, and then tells the gang that they all need to get ready to go to school, pointing out that education is important and that they can't dilly-dally and be late. And of course, what we quickly find out is that this Fred doesn't seem to understand doesn't seem to remember that there's a funny carburetor in the mystery machine, because he accidentally starts flooding the mystery machine's engine, and once he's told about what's going on, he immediately realizes, oh, I'm going to flood the mystery machine. Let's go onward. And also, once they start driving, he snaps at Scooby and Shaggy for eating in the car, which is what they always do, which of course strikes them as a little bit odd, and they're also a little disappointed as well. But this Fred continues to go on, stating that they can't eat in the car because it attracts crumbs, which attracts mice, which attracts disease, and it becomes a whole thing. So for that reason, he dissuades them from actually doing a thing in the mystery machine. Meanwhile, our Fred, he wakes up in the basement of the house where he was just in, and he looks at the mirror and it seems solid at first, and he hit his head, so he doesn't fully understand what's going on. So he immediately eventually walks out of the basement, calling for the rest of the gang, but quickly discovers that the house that he's in doesn't really exist anymore. It's literally just completely leveled, and of course this strikes him as confusing. So he starts running around the street. He starts running around the streets, calling out the names of his gang members, and he just starts running around looking for the rest of Mystery Incorporated, which he's having trouble finding. And of course he's looking around, and of course as he's looking around Crystal Cove, he notices that not only does Crystal Cove look a lot different, but also it's completely covered in skeletons, which he notes wasn't there before. Meanwhile, the gang they pull up in the mystery machine with what is quickly realizing is a completely different Fred. But he proceeds to go into the electronics store and tells them to wait there, which they also are completely confused about. But and they get out and they're a little confused about what's going on. But then the other Fred walks out of the building. He tosses the keys to Shaggy, calls him Norbert, and tells him to catch them, and tells him that he's going to drive. And this, of course, confuses Shaggy, since not only does he never drive, but nobody calls him Norbert. His name isn't even Norbert. He's and they also call the other friend out on that later, but I'll get to that. But in case they also wonder what he went in to go get, and the Fred just kind of remarks that he got something so that he can listen to the baseball game, claiming that he really loves sports, which is partly true, but he then proceeds to get into the passenger seat, and everybody's just very confused, but they continue to go onward and drive, and it's at this point where of course Scooby is obviously where he knows that Scooby looks a little bit sad in the mirror, and asks him if he needs to take a walk, but of course Scooby remarks that he can walk himself. At which point the other Fred remarks that maybe he's just hungry, and offers him a Beagle biscuit, which of course Scooby is offended by, pointing out that they're not Scooby snacks. But then the other Fred remarks that there's not really much of a difference, and that they probably all taste the same, which offends Scooby even more. He goes back into the back seat to lay his head down on Velma's lap, and tells him and mutters under his breath that maybe he should eat them then, which the other Fred picks up on, and Scooby tells him that he didn't say anything. But meanwhile, Fred is still, the real Fred is still running around running around Crystal Cove, unsure of where anybody is, and but eventually he does wind up finding the mystery machine, which he notes the back of is completely burnt out. And he has no idea what's going on. He has no idea what's happening, but he starts looking around, trying to find out what exactly is going on. And he eventually finds Mr. Trapples in the front seat, which he picks up and asks what's going on. And of course, Mr. Trapples obviously doesn't respond at all. And but of course he continues to look around. And eventually he finds what he believes is the gang dead on the ground. He just sees their clothes and a pile of dust. And he's not entirely sure what happened, but he quickly realizes that something horrible has obviously happened, and then wonders how it could possibly get any worse. But then it does get worse when Daphne's scarf winds up blowing in the wind, and he winds up catching it, and that's what causes Fred to start bawling, because he has no idea because he quickly realizes that Daphne is most likely dead too, and he can't really cope with that. At which point he runs up to Crystal Cove and is visibly upset about the fact that all the gang members are all dead. He has no idea how to cope with the rest of the gang being dead. So he's of course very confused. But then he hears a voice calling to him and asks him if that's really him. And he then looks and he visibly seems to recognize it as Daphne. But then Daphne gets closer and it's revealed that she's actually just really, really old. Which and of course this old Daphne then reveals that she's been looking for him for a while, and that then he disappeared so suddenly, and she's been trying to find him. And then she winds up realizing that Fred has her scarf, so she takes it from him, responds with jeepies, which of course Fred notes is a little bit odd, because jeepies isn't a real word, but she picks it up and remarks that she's been looking for it forever. At which point the old Daphne then proceeds to go on to explain what exactly happened. About how the Planispheric Disk has apparently destroyed Crystal Cove. According to old Daphne, after he disappeared, they couldn't find him, and then apparently the Planispheric Disk started speeding up and doing a thing, and it caused time to suddenly speed up and just completely caused time to accelerate, which caused pretty much everybody to turn to dust. And of course she points out that they need to absolutely find it before it speeds up time again. And Fred apologizes for the fact that he hit it, pointing out that he's apparently just really good at hiding things. So of course, this is this point where old Daphne tells them that they need to find him, with Velma saying that Velma was very insistent up until the end that the Planispheric Disk could very well reverse the effects, and they could easily go back in time to actually stop everything. And Fred, from that point onward, then proceeds to declare that he's going to do everything in his power to reverse time and stop this whole dark future from happening. And of course, at this point where he then proceeds to take old Daphne to a series of locations that he believes will actually be where the Planispheric Disk is hiding. He brings them to the Fearatorium, which is a cafeteria and named appropriately. But he brings them to, but of course the Fearatorium. That's actually how it's pronounced. Actually, it has 3 F's and then Fearatorium. That's how it's pronounced. But And of course he leads them there, pointing out that it was Shaggy and Scooby's favorite restaurant, and they start picking around it a little bit. Meanwhile, in the actual Crystal Cove, the other Fred, he gets information and starts poking around and he starts poking around the Fearatorium, but nobody can't find the Planispheric Disk, and tells the gang to fan out so they can find it. And they of course call him out on that, pointing out that since he's the one who hit it, he's the one who should know where to find it. And it quickly becomes apparent that whatever he's listening to on his radio is clearly some sort of information. They do eventually catch him alive. But in any case, the next place that Fred leads them is the Arcanumania movie complex, which of course old Daphne is very confused as to where exactly Fred led her there, but he then proceeds to remark that she of all people should know why he's taking her there, and of course old Daphne concludes that it must be where they had their first date, and of course Fred congratulates her, pointing out that he can always count on her to remember those kinds of things, and he starts looking around the theater. Meanwhile, in the real Crystal Cove, the other Fred, he's looking around. He's trying to find. He's also once again trying to find the Planispheric Disk in the theater. And it's at this point where Shaggy actually decides to ask the other Fred what the score is for the baseball game that he's supposedly listening to, and he immediately catches them a lie, because obviously the other Fred doesn't really tell him what the score is. He just kind of rebuffs him and tells him that if they need to find the Planispheric Disk while they still can, and he then proceeds, and when he realizes that it's not there, he proceeds to leave the Arcanamania complex, and then proceed to go to their next location, where which according to our Fred is revealed to actually be the kennel for horrible hounds, which is just a terrible name, but also it's revealed that this place is actually where the Rogers actually had made Shaggy kennel up Scooby when they went to go on vacation. And yeah, considering they don't like Scooby very much, it makes perfect sense that they would bring him to a place like this, but and of course they don't, and of course Scooby is uncomfortable about the fact that he has to go there again, but they do start looking around, and of course it's revealed that actually Fred realizes that it's not there either. So once again, the other Fred leads the gang out of the real place, and out of the real kennel, and on to the next location, which is revealed to the Education Center of Crystal Cove, which is revealed to just be like a superintendent type office. And when asking for the reasoning behind that, by old Daphne, our Fred just remarks that if he's very serious about education, and leaves her inside. Well, of course, the rest of the gang has since gotten sick of the other Fred, and he's been constantly belittling them this whole time, calling them names and just calling them being rude. And this is where they finally put their foot down and point out that they're not going to take his abusive attitude anymore. With Velma, of course, pointing out the very obvious fact that he keeps calling Shaggy Norbert, which isn't his name, and even then, that's a bit of a bad mistake, since obviously Shaggy only goes by his nickname. He doesn't, unless it's his parents, he only ever goes by Shaggy. Nobody else is allowed to call him Norbert, which of course, it's at this point where the other Fred then proceeds to leave. At which point Velma decides to huddle up the rest of the gang and asks her if it's just her, or if Fred has been acting weird. And of course the rest of the gang do corroborate that yes, he has been acting strange. So they're trying to. So of course, it's at this point where Velma reveals that she has to actually find a bit of a pattern to try and figure out why Fred seems to be acting so strange. So they decide to Velma decides to retrace their steps and writes out all the names of all the places they visited so far, being the Theatorium, the Arcanamania Theater, the kennel for horrible hounds, and finally the Crystal Cove Education Center, which when she writes them all their names, reveals that there's actually a coded message that reveals that the Fred they've been following is a fake Fred, which of course surprises everybody, and of course it's seemingly coincidence at first, but I'll get to that. But of course, Velma points out that obviously whoever sent the message is the real Fred, and then he's most likely trapped somewhere. So they need to figure out where he is. And of course they quickly conclude that they're going to need to find a way to stop him. At which point the fake Fred comes back revealing that he actually knows where the real location is. And sure enough, Fred also the real Fred actually reveals that he actually knows where the real location is as well. But it's at this point where old Daphne tells them that they need to hurry and stop wasting time. At which point Fred then remarks that he actually knows where the real location is. But then it's revealed that actually they need to get out of there before midnight, because it's revealed that the skeletons that have been lining the streets actually come to life at midnight. And of course, it's at this point where they actually proceed to attack Fred and old Daphne. And they immediately pile into the mystery machine, while also fending off the skeletons. And Fred eventually gets in the mystery machine, and they eventually drive off and escape from the skeletons. Meanwhile, the fake Fred proceeds to lead them to the steel ink factory, which is the old abandoned factory, and that's where Fred said that the real Fred said that the Planispheric Disk was. But in case it's at this point where the fake Fred finally realizes that the Planispheric Disk is in fact in none of these locations that he's been led to, and then proceeds to tell them that it's actually in the next location, which is actually the factory, in the old abandoned steel ink factory, which he immediately tells. Well, he just calls Shaggy the hippie, but he tells Shaggy to drive, and they all do, and they immediately go to the factory. Meanwhile, old Daphne remarks that Fred doesn't seem to be actually taking her to the factory, and of course, it's at this point where Fred reveals that he actually is going to the factory, the real factory in the real Crystal Cove, and then proceeds to immediately drive up to a wall, which old Daphne points out is steel concrete, and he's not going to be able to get out that way, but he eventually does, and he does burst out, revealing that it's actually fake, just like everything else in the fake Crystal Cove town. And then proceeds to reveal that he quickly figured out that it wasn't actually wasn't the real Crystal Cove. He then proceeds to reveal that actually he figured it out pretty quickly, because obviously, first and foremost, he figured out that it wasn't actually the real Daphne, since not only did she not know where their first date was, since if you don't remember, he took the real Daphne to the Trap-O-Rama exhibit back in season 1. But also, he also points out that she obviously said Jeepies, which is a combination of both Daphne and Velma's catchphrase, and nobody says that. He openly points out that's not a real word, and it just sounds ridiculous. But in any case, he then proceeds to take her to the real factory, while the fake Fred also takes his gang to the real factory as well. And they quickly realize that they need to do something to stop the fake Fred from actually getting his hands on the Planispheric Disk. At which point Scooby and Shaggy suggest that they do what the real Fred would do and try to trap him. And of course, this is this point where Velma does point out that obviously that sounds like a good idea, but they need to do that before he actually gets his hands on the Planispheric Disk. But quickly realize too late that they were too late in actually getting the piece of the Planispheric Disk away from the fake Fred, who quickly finds it in the briefcase that is hidden in. At which point the gang then decides at this point to finally call him out as an imposter, and he does point out that it took them long enough, but then also asks them who's going to stop him from actually taking the Planispheric Disk, and calls out each and every one of them for not being able to. At which point the real Fred shows up, swinging in from a chain, and he tells him that he's going to stop him, but also gets confused as to which Fred is which temporarily, because obviously the whole doppelganger thing that obviously confuses people a lot. And at which point it's at this point where the real Fred and the fake Fred get into a bit of a wrestling match over the Planispheric Disk, which in the process causes them to turn on the factory by accident. And of course, Velma urges the rest of the gang to actually go and help them, but of course they don't know which Fred to actually help, since obviously there's a real Fred and a fake Fred, so they are confused. At which point old Daphne walks up and tells them not to hurt him, which freaks Daphne out because she isn't used to because she just sees herself as an old woman and is very visibly confused and a little bit scared by that. But in case the real Fred and the fake Fred, they continue to fight their way through the machinery. With a couple of near misses, they almost wander into the furnace at one point and almost get crushed by one of the smashing things. But I don't know the actual terminology, but yeah, they're walking through. They're just wrestling through, and they are actually being careful to not get smushed by any of the machinery. But eventually, they land in a pile in a big hopper full of scrap. And the Planispheric Disk winds up falling out while they're fighting, and they try to climb out after it, but then the hopper starts dumping out scrap with them in it, and they start getting spit out onto one of the conveyor belts, which conveniently the Planispheric Disk landed on. So they start fighting over each other, and in the process, Fred accidentally steps his foot into a bucket. But while the fake Fred tries to make a run for it after grabbing the Planispheric Disk, and tells him that tells the real Fred that he'll never catch him. But the real Fred tells the fake Fred that he doesn't have to catch him, and proceeds to throw a chain on his ankles, which wraps around him, and then tells him that he just needs him to stay put. At which point he turns on the magnet at the other end of the conveyor belt, and the fake Fred winds up getting stuck in it, because of the metal chain. But also because Fred stepped into a bucket, when he goes to pick up the Planispheric Disk, he winds up getting stuck on the magnet too. So he winds up getting stuck on the magnet alongside the fake Fred. At which point the rest of the gang come to their aid, but quickly deduce that they don't really know which Fred is which, since, as Shaggy puts it, they're identical down to the ascot, so he has no idea which is which. At which point Daphne decides to actually kind of figure it out by asking each Fred what they think of her. And of course, the fake Fred points out that he obviously loves Daphne more than anything else. She is his world. She is his love. He will never not love her. While the real Fred gives the more obvious answer, and that's he just kind of mutters to himself while also not being able to vocalize his feelings for Daphne clearly, and it quickly becomes apparent that that's the real Fred. So at which point she hugs him and also takes the Planispheric Disk from him. At which point they decide to actually go in and mask the fake Fred and old Daphne. And of course, if fake Fred asks if he's so smart, then ask who he really is. And Fred quickly concludes that it's actually his real dad, Brad Childs, and goes to unmask him, but quickly discovers that it's not really a mask, and that Brad reveals that he actually had plastic surgery to make himself look like Fred. Pointing out that the gang would have spotted a mask way too easily. Since obviously this plan involved him being near the gang for an extended period of time. Obviously, if he was wearing a mask, they would have immediately figured out that he was fake. But so he had plastic surgery done instead. At which point Velma concludes that old Daphne must be Judy Reeves, and then proceeds to pull on her face as well, even though she remarks that she's not wearing a mask either. But Daphne just remarks that Velma just remarks that she knew the whole time. Which of course she's just implied that she just wanted to do that to spite Judy. But in case at this point where they then proceed to wonder why they did it, and of course Brad then reveals that it was actually for the treasure and not much else. Revealing that not only did Professor Pericles force Mr. E to give them all plastic surgery, because obviously he's still got the mutated cobra larvae in his spine. He's pretty much forced to do whatever Professor Pericles says. But after that, he also had Destroido Corporation employees build a fake movie set that is designed to look like the real Crystal Cove, so that they could deduce where the piece of Planispheric Disk was by leading Fred around a fake movie set, while the real one wandered around the real Crystal Cove looking in all the different places. But obviously, since Fred quickly deduced that the world was fake, and that it was full of fake skeletons and the whole thing was a movie set, he quickly saw through the plan and left a coded message so that the rest of the gang could figure out that the Fred they were following around was a fake. But of course, this is this point where Velma then proceeds to point out that obviously the whole thing was insane, and that's obviously it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Which is just Scooby-Doo in general, since obviously a lot of the plans in Scooby-Doo don't make much sense when you think about them for more than 5 seconds. But then it's at this point where Professor Pericles appears in the rafters of the factory and asks them if it's really insane, or if it's just so brilliant that she can't begin to comprehend it. At which point Fred tells Professor Pericles that obviously he failed and that he's not getting the piece of the Planispheric Disk now. But then Professor Pericles corrects him, pointing out that Fred's going to let him walk away with both his associates and the piece of the Planispheric Disk. And his insurance tells him that he's going to destroy the one thing he loves more than any other. At which point 2 Kriegsstaffelbots appear out of the darkness and grab Daphne. And with no other choice, Fred reluctantly gives up the Planispheric Disk as well as Brad and Judy to Professor Pericles, who then proceeds to snatch up the Planispheric Disk and then proceeds to thank Fred for his cooperation, and then leaves while the Greek staff about to throw Daphne into Fred's waiting arms, and then they proceed to just walk out of the factory as well. At which point the gang then proceeds to reconvene at the mystery machine, and of course Daphne is very much upset about the fact that they had to give up the piece of Planispheric Disk, but Fred points out that doesn't really matter anymore, and that all that matters is that she's safe and sound, and that also, and more importantly, she doesn't look old anymore, which makes him very happy. But also Scooby also points out the very obvious problem is that the big problem is that now Professor Pericles has the Planispheric Disk, and sure enough, he then proceeds to lead it into a room in the basement of Destroido Corporation, where he puts it into a specially made socket designed to hold the Planispheric Disk, and then the whole room and all the circuitry surrounding it proceeds to change and goes from a dark blue to a light yellow, and he then proceeds to respond that he's coming to set his master free. So, which implies that he knew what was underneath Crystal Cove pretty much the whole time, and so he knew what the Planispheric Disk was and what it was meant to do. He knew that the whole time, and that's what the episode seems to imply at the end here. He knew that the Planispheric Disk was going to lead him to the evil entity at the end. And now he has what he needs. Well, not exactly what he has, since obviously we discussed for the past several episodes now that the Planispheric Disk has led the Mist Arm gang to all the keys that they're going to need to use to get to the Planispheric Disk. How they're supposed to use these keys are still a mystery, since obviously the Planispheric Disk only pointed them in the general direction of where to find them, and hasn't really explained how to use them yet. So, and obviously they're just an assortment of items anyway, so obviously, yeah, they're keys, but we don't know what they do. But yeah, Professor Pericles doesn't know that it led them all to the keys that they need to open the door. He just knows that the Planispheric Disk is going to lead him directly to the cursed treasure. So yeah, he swiped that, but he can't use it much anymore. It's not going to do him much good without the keys. So obviously that's going to be a thing that's going to be set up for the end of the series. Obviously, Professor Pericles has the Planispheric Disk, which is going to be useful in freeing the evil entity, but he can't get there. At least not without the gang's help. So, yeah, obviously that's going to be a big thing. He's obviously not going to be able to get inside to the room for the cursed treasure at the end of the series. I don't think. At least that's what it seems to imply. Obviously there are only the keys. So he doesn't have any of the keys, so he can't really get into the place. But I'm curious how that's going to work out once they finally get to that. But in case. That's going to do it for my review of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks that are my way of saying thanks. So be sure to check those out. Links down in the description. And also, if you want to see more content from me, then first and foremost, go check out my Twitch. Link is down in the description. I'm trying to push for affiliate, so if you guys can help me with that, I would very much appreciate it. But also, more importantly, be sure to go check out the videos linked in the end screen as well if you're already here. So it's, the top video is the most recent video, and the bottom video is based on what you've already seen. So those will point you in the general direction of more stuff. So just go check those out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!